Okay. So we're gonna add some sounds, and we're also gonna add some interaction. So I'm gonna add a couple more animations. So I'm gonna go over to Piskel and add to my animations that I've got. Um, I'm gonna, get my assets set up first, but you can always go back and forth. You don't necessarily have to do it in this order. But I'm gonna import one of my Piskel files. So I'm gonna go to my art folder in my class folder, and I'm gonna import my main character sprite. And I'm just gonna replace this. And so I just have like the default idle animation, and then I have like the little walk animation. And so I'm gonna make like a animation where he's gonna like eat the bird. So I'm just gonna do that real quick. It's not gonna look good, but I just wanna add it in here. So I'm gonna start with my idle animation and just drag this down here. And I'm going to basically just, let's see, I'm gonna erase some stuff first. And I'm gonna just make the mouth bigger. So I'm gonna hit 2 to get my pink color, and I'll just kind of make the mouth big like that. And I'll redraw the legs, so I'll hit 1 to get blue, and I'll kind of make the legs look like he's like jumping up a little bit. So I'll do like something like that. It's gonna be kind of goofy, but that's what we'll go for. Okay. So then I'm just gonna duplicate that frame and then just make the mouth like a little line. So I'm gonna color that in and just go like that. And so I'll just play those 2 frames. And so it'll kind of look like he's like biting a little bit. And then I'll have the bird kind of explode in a little poof. And that's what I'll go for. So obviously this is for the character collecting the item, or, eating the bird, essentially. You may have the item as like an enemy, and so it hurts the character. So you would want to design the animation to show that the character is getting hurt. The animation is really just to show the player what's happening in the game, so that they can connect what they're seeing visually with what's happening, in the changes in the game. So I'm gonna export this as a zip. And I need to make sure to match the scale. So I was using this 2x. So I'm going to scale by 2, which is what it already is. And I'll just download this zip. And most of the frames are just the same. So I could just go to my downloads folder. I could just replace the whole folder. Or I can just, so I could replace all of the sprites, or I could just drag the last 2 sprites in there. Either way, it doesn't really make a difference. I'm just replacing the first 3, and then I'm adding these 2 new sprites. So those are my 2 new character sprites. And then I need a couple more. I need another bird animation. So I'm going to save this main sprite. So I have a new copy of that. And then I'm going to go to import. And you might have the sprites in your local storage as well, so you can load them from there. So I'm going to import my bird sprite. I'm going to replace the sprite I have open. And so when the character eats the bird, I just kind of want it to like poof, basically. Like, it's like some feathers that are kind of like jumping around. So I'm just going to hit 1 to get the color from down here. And I'll just kind of like draw a couple parts of the bird, but it's like broken up. Again, you don't have to do it like this. I'm just doing this as an example. And then I'm just gonna like make a few more frames like that. So I'll just kind of draw a little smaller version. Like that. And then just a couple dots. And that 3 actually I think is fine. So I'll just have like a really quick 3-frame animation where the bird disappears. Again, it's not super realistic. For the demo purpose, I'm just going pretty fast, but we just need something that indicates that something's happening. And in this case, the bird is just disappearing. Okay. So I'm gonna save the bird sprite again, and then I'm gonna export it, and we'll do it at 2x. So I'll download another zip, and then go back to the Finder, and go to my downloads folder. So I'm just hitting Command N to open a new window. And here's my bird zip. And so same thing, I'm just gonna drag these sprites in here. And you know, if you made changes to the other sprites, it's good to replace those, make sure they're up to date. And then I'm just gonna put in my bird and my sprite new Piskel files here, just so I have those. And then I'm just gonna delete all this stuff that I don't need. And there we go. So now I have my animations. So now I'm gonna make some sound. So I'm gonna make a new folder for sounds, and I'm gonna go into the browser, and I'm gonna use this JFXer website. You don't have to use this. This is just a good website for generating some sound files, and it's geared towards video games, so it has some like defaults that you can play with. This won't be part of the recording. Well, actually, if I play it over the speakers, it'll get picked up. So I'll just turn the volume up a little bit. But I'm not recording the computer audio, so you won't hear the actual sounds. You'll hear, you know, from the speakers in the room, so it'll sound pretty bad. But there's other ways you can do this. Another good site is like freesound.org. You can, if you want like realistic sounding sounds, this is a good place to find them. There's, you know, you can get your sounds from wherever. But I want basically 2 sounds for now. I might add more later. I want one sound for when the bird first appears, so that we'll know that a new sprite has been added. And then I want a sound for when the player eats the bird. So for when the bird first appears, I'm gonna try maybe a jump sound. Whoa, sorry, that was a little too loud. So the cool thing about this website is it'll generate sort of randomized sounds. So if I keep clicking jump, it'll give me different options. And then if you like one of them, like this one, I kind of like this. You can actually, there's a lot of different parameters for how it designs the sound. And so you can play with those a little bit. There's a lot, so I'm not gonna go over all of them right now. But one that makes a big difference is the waveform. So I could try different waveforms. And if I decide I like one, I can just click this export button and it'll save a sound file for me. So it'll download it. So I'm gonna click export. And so if I go back to the Finder, and I have to go back to my downloads folder, there's that jump sound. I'm gonna rename this to bird spawn, so I remember what I wanted to use it for, because I might forget what I was making. So I've got one for that, and now something for when the player eats the bird. So I could use like explosion maybe. Or maybe I could do laser. Or maybe hit. I kind of like, let's see what else. Oh, that one's pretty good. Okay. So another thing I could change is like the frequency. So yeah, there's a lot of different parameters you can play with to get different sounds. Anyway, I'm gonna go with that. So I'm gonna click export. And if I go back to the Finder, there's that sound file. And so I'm gonna rename this bird dies, just so I remember what that is. I'm gonna drag these in my sound folder so I can always find them later. You can also save with JFXer. You can see that it has like all these different sounds I've done. So it saves these. If I refresh this, they're still gonna be there. So it kind of remembers these settings locally. But I can also save a file. And what that looks like is, I actually don't really keep these normally, but it's just a JFXer file. If you look at what that is, it's basically just all the settings for the different parameters. I usually don't save this because unless you come up with some really crazy cool thing, it's pretty easy just to recreate it. So you can save that if you want. You don't have to. Anyway, we've got a couple sounds to use. And so now let's go back to Scratch and add these into our game. So I'm going to go to Scratch. I'm going to upload the sounds. Or actually, first, we have a few things to do. Let's upload our animations and our sounds. So I'm going to start with the player. Go to Costumes. I'm going to add the new sprite. So I'm going to click that Upload button and go to my main sprite folder and add 3 and 4. And I'll call this one, let's call it Eat 1 and Eat 2. Okay, so now I've got another animation for when the player eats the bird. I'm usually doing these like 2-frame animations because it just makes it a lot easier. Of course, you can do 3-frame or 10-frame or whatever. But it just means that you have to either, put in more blocks or use a different structure to get the animation. Okay, so then let's go to my sprites. And I'm going to upload my new bird animation. And so I have flying 1, flying 2, and then I'll just have dies 1, dies 2, and dies 3. Doesn't really matter what you call these. It's just important to label them so it's easier to create the animation in the code later. Okay, so now let's upload our sounds. So I'm going to go over to the Sounds tab. I'm going to delete these. I was playing with it earlier. So I just click the Upload button here, just like I do with my sprites or my costumes. And I'm going to go to Sounds and just grab both of those sounds. And so here we can see the sound. And we can kind of play around. You can actually do some editing. I can like reverse the sound if I want. I can do a little fade in and fade out. I can make it louder or quieter. I can copy it and make changes there. So there's a lot I can do with this. I'm going to undo those changes, but I've got my basic sound set up. So now let's add all these things in. So I'm going to go back to my code. So when I first add the bird, I'm going to play the sound so that we know a bird has been added. So I'm going to go up here. And so I have the bird can be added through when we click the flag or when we start as a clone. So I'm going to go to sound. And we just have this basic, the first block is play sound, and then you choose the sound, and then until done. So I'm going to add this to the beginning of these blocks. And so now you can see the bird plays a sound when it gets added. Although it looks like some of my other code is not running anymore. Oh, I took this out. Okay. It looks like somehow my movement isn't going. Okay, that's okay. I'll figure that out in a second. But for now, we can see the basic spawn happens. Okay. What? The second block? This one? This one? Oh, this? This one? Oh, no, so play sound until done just means it plays the whole sound versus start sound, is going to play the sound. I don't know exactly what the difference is. We could throw it in there and see if it changes something. I don't think it changes anything. I'm not sure, like, yeah, I'm not sure what the difference is. We could look it up in the documentation, but I think we can, you know, take a look at that later. Okay. Let's throw this back in here. Okay. So, what do we need to do next? So, now what we want to do is start programming the interaction between the player and the bird sprites. And so there's a couple things we can do. We want to basically look for a collision between the bird and the player. So let's take a look at our code over here. I'm gonna move this over here. Okay, so it's gonna be similar to this repeat until touching edge. And we can add this in here, or we can define it in a new block. So right now we have, you know, repeat until touching edge. Oh, you know what? I think I need to, this should actually maybe just be a forever block. Let's do that. I think that's what's going on as I was playing around with this. Okay, let's see if it works now. Okay. So now they're repeating, but I'm not getting the same. Oh, you know what? We should put the sound in the spawn block. So let's add this down here instead of up here. Okay, so now it'll spawn. It'll play the sound every time it spawns. Okay. Okay, so now we need to make a similar block for when the bird is touching the player. So we could add this to our movement block, or we can define it in a new block. Either way, you guys can kind of figure out what is the best way to approach it. I'm gonna add a new block. So I'm gonna make a block and call this collision. And I'll define the collision. So we're gonna use another forever here. And we're gonna do something similar with our if. So we'll throw that in here. And we're gonna use the same sensing, but now we're seeing if it's touching sprite 0. Which I should actually rename. Let's rename this player. That's a better name for this. And let's rename this guy bird. Okay. So if we're touching the player, then this is what we have to decide when we have to decide what to do. And we might want to, you know, use a similar block here, but we're going to want to first change the animation. Okay, so let's go to our looks. And what we can do, let's see. I don't have as much space when I'm on the projector, so I'm trying to line everything up. Okay. So, we may need to change our animation a little bit. We'll use some more different ways to do this in next week when we go over variables and stuff like that. But for now, let's just set up our animation here. So if we're touching the player, then, well, actually, we could just add this. Maybe we just add this. Yeah, okay. Let's do the animation first, but I'm going to put it in the animation block. So let's go to our animation block first. Let's add a control event, and we'll basically add an if else. So we have different animations for if we're touching the player or not. So let's throw this guy in here. And so we can define this as if we're not touching the player. So another thing that we haven't talked about, I've seen a few guys use this, but in operators, there's these little green blocks that let us do some basic math. So you could switch this around and have the main animation in the else, but this is a good chance to talk about these little green blocks. So let's say if not, and then let's grab this touching player and throw that in there. So if we're not touching the player, we're gonna play our flying animation. And if we are touching the player, let's duplicate this flying animation and let's change this to our dies animation. And I'm just gonna do dies 1, dies 2, and then I'll duplicate this and do dies 3. Okay, so now let's try to catch one of our birds and see if we change the animation. Okay, so we can see when I get the bird, that animation plays. And we're also going to stop the movement in a second, so we will, see that animation play all the way through. But when it's done, let's hide that sprite so we don't see it go back to the original. So now we just see that disappearing animation, and then it respawns. So now we want the player, the bird to, disappear and be reset. So we can do that in our collision block. So let's, we're gonna do a couple things here. One is that we're gonna, change the reset the bird, but we also need the player animation to play. So we'll do that next. So in our collision block, if we're touching the player, let's go up and make sure that we're actually running this block before we start doing anything else. So I think we need one of both of these. So let's get another green guy. And when I start as a clone. And let's do our collision here. So again, this is a personal preference thing. You might want to put this in the main movement thing so you don't have to create as many different blocks. But when we hit the player, we're gonna set the animation. So we've already set that up. But then let's also reset the bird motion. So if we touch the player, we're gonna play a sound. So we're gonna say bird dies. And then let's put in a wait. So we're gonna put a wait here, and this will wait a second, and then we can go back to our bird spawn. So let's add a bird spawn here. And that's pretty much the same thing that's happening up here, except the one difference is that we want this animation to play. So let's see if that works. He still goes. So we do hear the animation, but the bird keeps moving. Okay. So for now, until we start using variables, I think actually it'll be easier to just throw this inside our bird movement. So I'm just gonna grab this and put it right here. And let's just get rid of that. Oh, I have to, let's get rid of these. Okay. So let's see if this will be better. Okay, so yeah, that's more the behavior we want. The bird disappears and then resets. Okay, it doesn't look perfect. There's a lot of things that we could kind of adjust, but we're just trying to get the basics set up right now. So then the last thing that we want to do is we also want to play the player animation. So this is where the difference between the block and the broadcast will become more clear. If we want something to happen in a different sprite, then we need to use the broadcast so that it goes to all of the different sprites in the animation. So for the bird is going to broadcast a message, and then in the player, we'll get that message and we'll play the animation. So let's go to our control, events, and we're going to broadcast a message when the bird hits the player. So we're going to make a new message and just say bird died, or bird eaten. Okay. So this will go to all of the sprites in the program. So we can go back to our player sprite and we can receive the bird eaten event. So right now in our player sprite, we have just like the walking animation, and we have the idle animation. So we have, if we're going to the right, we're going to play the walk animation. If we're going to the left, we're going to play the walk animation. Else, we're going to switch to idle. So now we have to make this a little bit more complicated. So this is a good time to kind of review some of our control flow stuff. So one thing that we can make a little bit simpler in this version of the project is we can, since we're using one animation for both the left and the right, we can combine that using one of our little operators. You may be using different animations, in which case this won't work for you. But for me, I'm going to go ahead and use this little green OR guy here. And so now I can say if the right arrow is pressed, I have to make sure to get it in the right place, or the left arrow is pressed, then we're going to switch, we're going to play this animation. So now I can get rid of this whole block. So let's make sure that still works. Okay. So then we receive the message when the bird is eaten. And so we can play an animation I guess we might need to use a variable. I should have thought through. Let's see if we can get away with this for now. We're going to make this a little bit more complex next week, but let's see what we can get away with for now. Okay, so when we receive the bird eaten, we want to basically play an animation, and I want to repeat it a couple times. So I'm going to take the repeat here and do 2, and then I'm going to copy this animation block here. And so I'm going to take this walk animation, but I'm going to change it to eat 1, eat 2. And so it should just do that. And if we're lucky, it'll go back to the walking animation afterwards. Let's see how it looks. Okay. So we are getting the eating animation. It's going a little fast. I'm going to change this to 0.2 seconds. And then try it again. Okay, so it is playing the animation. The problem is that it's cycling in between. It's still going back to the walk cycle because this is still happening even when this is not happening. So the way that we're going to deal with that, we'll talk about next week. So don't worry about it for now because we're going to need to use variables to make the animation more sophisticated. And we haven't learned variables yet. But we've learned a bunch of stuff, new stuff this week. So we'll just leave that as is for now. Yeah, that's what we'll end this week. You guys, we can work on that, and then we'll fix some things and add some new stuff with our variables next week. Okay, so let's talk about documentation for this week for a minute, and then we'll go back to class workshop time. So for our documentation, now that we've got a lot of moving parts, it's going to be better to see a video. So I can't demo making a video because I'm already recording. So I can't really do that, but I'll kind of like set things up, and then I'll stop this recording and I'll just demo recording for a second, and you know, that's how we'll have to do that. But if we look at the class page real quick, if you go to the links and go to documentation resources, you can see on here I've got some tutorials. Looks like this one is, hopefully it's still on YouTube. Okay, I'll have to replace this one. That's weird. But there's screen recording tutorials for Mac and Windows here. And so these two are just basic screen recording, which is what I'm going to talk about. You can also use OBS, which is like a streaming software, if you want to do more advanced recording. You don't have to do this, but that's what these two videos cover. So those are just some resources to kind of review this stuff. So anyway, to make my post, I still want to do some basic image documentation. So I'm going to click on like the bird guy, and I might zoom out a little bit. I don't have a lot of space because of the resolution of the projector, but I just want to show some of the significant changes to the code. So I'll kind of organize this a little bit like this, and then I'll take a screenshot here. So let me drag this guy out, and I'm just going to hit Command-Shift-4, and then I'm going to hit space, and I'm going to hold Option and take a screenshot there. And then I might want to, you know, show the sounds, or the sounds are attached to this bird sprite. So I could take a screenshot of the sounds that I added as well. And then maybe my new costumes. I just want to, you know, capture everything that I'm adding to the game as I progress. But then I also want to show a video. So the best way to show a video is going to be to go into preview mode. And then basically I'll set up a recording and start the recording and then hit the green flag. So once I have that video, I'll go over to the Open Lab. So this part I'll, you know, demo in a moment once I stop the current recording. But I'll go over to the Open Lab, which is right here. I'll make a new post, and I'll call this week 4 Scratch progress, and choose the documentation category. And I'll probably put the video first. So, you know, that's the first thing that people will see because that's going to be the most interesting content. So I'm just going to put video here, and then I'll add some of my images. So I took some screenshots. I'm going to go to the Finder. I'm going to go to my documentation and make a new folder for week 4. And I'll throw these screenshots in here. And that's where I'll add the video in a little bit as well. And so I'll just call this code and call this one sounds. And I'll call this one animation. And I'll just add these into my documentation. So I've got the code. I'll add some context here. Here's the new animation code I added. I'll add my animation section here and say I added a sprite for when, or sprite animation for when the bird gets eaten. And then I'll add a little sound documentation. So we just want to document all of the progress that we're making. So here's the sound for when the bird spawns. Okay, so I'm going to stop this recording now, and then I'm going to go over making the video recording. And I'm going to add this right here. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to publish it and put it on Brightspace. Okay.